A few weeks prior to this video, we discussed why Delta Airlines operates Airbus jets not flown by its large US rivals. Commonality with the existing fleet was one major factor, as was the simple fact that certain types were best suited for the airline's operations. But digging even deeper, we can see that decisions made over a decade ago were critical to putting the airline on a solid path to success, while also avoiding some catastrophes perhaps only visible with hindsight. Choosing to wait several years longer than its rivals to order the Boeing 737 MAX may have been particularly beneficial. It's these historical decisions and a strategy of prudence that we'll look at for today's video. Did you ever notice how much Delta likes to use the word prudent in its press releases? Perhaps more common in the corporate world, the word prudent isn't too common in day-to-day language. Defined by Oxford Languages as acting with or showing care and thought for the future, the word has appeared a few times in Delta Airlines media statements. Here are a few examples. In 2014, Delta said its order for 25 Airbus A350-900s and 25 A330-900neos continued its, quote, focus on making prudent, cost-effective investments in its fleet. In a 2015 comment about operating Airbus A350-300s, airline president Ed Bastian stated that it, quote, reflects our continued strategy of making prudent investments in our fleet that enhance our customer experience and operational reliability. Cancelling its Boeing 787 order in 2016 that it inherited from merging with Northwest, an airline executive said at the time, "This business decision is consistent with Delta's fleet strategy to prudently address our wide-body aircraft needs." And most recently, in 2022, Bastian said the following about his airline's major Boeing 737 MAX 10 order. These new aircraft provide superior operating economics and network flexibility, and the agreement reflects our prudent approach to deploying our capital. With all of these statements in mind, it does appear that a quote-unquote prudent approach is a long-time strategy. Indeed, it's one that former Delta CEO Richard Anderson laid out very clearly in a 2013 interview. In May 2013, media outlet Skift published an article titled, "Delta is in no rush to buy new planes. CEO says let other airlines test them." The piece, mostly republished from an interview with Reuters, discussed how Delta's CEO at the time, Richard Anderson, had made the decision to avoid brand new offerings from Boeing and Airbus. At the time, other carriers were rushing to get in line for the Boeing 737 MAX and Airbus A320neo. Delta's US rivals, United, American, and Southwest, had already made deals for the 737 MAX. However, Delta itself was a notable holdout. Anderson, who was the CEO of Delta between 2007 and 2016, said in the interview that his preference was to, quote, get toward the end of a production line and purchase jets after kinks are worked out. Anderson also mentioned that this strategy would allow time for plane makers to offer lengthened variants to hold more passengers, noting that these stretches were, quote, always better than the original economics. In the interview, Anderson was characterized as risk-averse because of his strategy. The Boeing 737 MAX, which was new at the time, featured new, much more efficient engines. When speaking about the type and whether or not Delta would order it, Anderson said, "We will evaluate it, but we would rather see some other people fly that engine around for a while." The airline CEO was also quoted as saying, "We would rather see proven products that have cash-on-cash returns from the moment we take delivery. That is much more important." It's interesting to look back at old articles and interviews discussing strategy to measure the success of those decisions. In two important ways, Anderson appears to have made the right decision to hold off on operating new aircraft. Firstly, the fatal crashes of 737 MAX aircraft in 2018 and 2019 revealed design issues with the type's largely unknown Maneuvering Characteristics Augmentation System, or MCAS, which was installed to compensate for balance issues associated with the larger engines. Delta, not operating the type, was unaffected. Its rivals, however, were forced to ground their large 737 MAX fleets for some 20 months as the jet needed to be recertified. As the global grounding coincided with the COVID pandemic, the impact on airlines may have been eased. Secondly, Delta took its time with a long-standing 787 order that it inherited from the merger with Northwest Airlines. The 787's early years would be plagued with issues, notably thermal runaway events with its lithium-ion batteries. The airline's 787 order would eventually be cancelled in favour of an Airbus-heavy wide-body fleet. Going further and matching up Anderson's comments with Delta's aircraft orders also shows that the airline has indeed heavily valued the operating economics of stretched variants, which are offered later in production cycles. We can see this with the airline's relatively late adoptions of the Boeing 737-900ER and the Airbus A321neo. In the same way that Delta has thus far skipped over the A319neo and A320neo, the carrier has passed over most of Boeing's 737 MAX offerings and settled for a massive order for 100 737 MAX 10s, the type's longest variant. Although this order was placed with Ed Bastian as CEO, it would appear to be a strategy similar to Anderson's. Let other airlines experience issues with the type and jump in later, going for a stretched variant. Now, while it would be easy enough to cherry-pick the cases where the airline made the decisions in line with Anderson's comments, we do have to mention times where Delta deviated from this strategy. Indeed, the carrier was a relatively early customer for the Bombardier C series, now the Airbus A220. CH Aviation reported in 2016 that Anderson was quite impressed with the new aircraft type and was quoted as saying, "You know, they brought the C series to Atlanta and it's a pretty impressive airplane. The geared turbofan is really the first big innovation since the Boeing 787 revolutionized the composite structure for the body, the fuselage of the airplane. So we actually think that at right price it's quite a competitive airplane, particularly given the engine technology. So we're taking a very serious look at it." Delta's early adoption of the type came with some issues. The aircraft, specifically its Pratt & Whitney PW1500G geared turbofan engines, would go on to face problems leading to airframes spending extended time on the ground, unable to operate revenue service. Nonetheless, Delta seems to be handling A220 issues relatively well, particularly when compared to airlines like Air Baltic. The Latvian airline's A220 engine issues have been made much worse due to supply chain issues. It's interesting to note that Delta ordered and operated the Airbus A350 relatively early as well. The aircraft entered service in 2015, while the first A350 was delivered to Delta in 2017. However, aside from surface degradation issues mostly experienced by Qatar Airways, it would appear that early adoption of the A350 has gone relatively well. Despite the excitement and attention gained from being a global launch customer, choosing to order and operate a new aircraft design can be a huge gamble. Issues can arise over time, while development and entry into service tends to face delays. Clearly, newer generations of existing types have proven to be problematic as well. Just look at the delays associated with the Boeing 777X. Even with an equally well-proven platform like the A321, the A321XLR has also faced delays due to unforeseen circumstances regarding fuel tank design. Obviously, any new type needs to have those all-important launch customers and early adopters. These players are crucial in order to raise capital for production ramp-up. However, it's evident that patience and a willingness to operate older types can pay off for the airline customer. Going back to Delta and its future fleet, one has to wonder how much of Anderson's strategy current CEO Ed Bastian has decided to adopt, and where Bastian might take his own path. The two worked side by side for many years, with Bastian as the airline's president for the entire 9 years that Anderson was CEO. Will Delta continue to make prudent decisions? Only time will tell. What do you think of this airline's fleet strategy? Has it indeed been good for Delta? Share your thoughts by leaving a comment. Simple Flying publishes over 150 articles every week. If you're looking for the latest aviation news and insights, visit simpleflying.com.